Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. A bunch of things to cover today, so I want to get started right now. Okay, and she's going to be sentenced on that charge that she was found guilty of, the abuse of a corpse. She's going to be sentenced today at 11 a.m. She could face between 6 months to a year in prison. Let's break down what happened and what we can expect. Joining me, two special guests, attorney Terri Austin and trial attorney Byron Brown. Great to have you both here. Terri, I'm going to start with you. Wow, what a verdict, what a reaction. We saw her actually handcuffed and being led out of court. She didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to her parents. It was pretty emotional. It was dramatic. Were you surprised by the verdict?
I wasn't surprised by the verdict. I thought the defense did such a great job on his closing, and I was thinking that the jury might agree that there wasn't any murder or any harm to the child. I think we talked about this. The handling of the corpse was something I think did offend the jury, which is why they came back with that decision. So I think overall they considered the evidence and they came to the proper conclusion, and it was extremely emotional, and particularly when they took her away. She couldn't even say goodbye to her parents, and that was difficult to watch.
Byron, let me ask you, do you think this jury had come up with their decision before the closing arguments? Do you think they were persuaded by the closing arguments? I mean, did they go into that deliberation room with their minds made up? It's impossible to know, but I'm curious what you think given the facts of this case.
Yeah, I think the jury went into the deliberation room with a decision already in its mind. I think they must have heavily relied upon the statements made by Richardson as it relates to the police saying, I didn't kill her, and then also the statements that she made to her parents. And I believe that that is the result of them coming back and finding her not guilty on the bigger charges. But, I mean, the corpse charge, it seems there was no way that she was going to get out of that. So we'll see what she ends up facing as far as a penalty goes.
Let's talk about that. So, Terri, 6 months to a year. This judge has to make this decision. What do you think the sentence is going to be here?
I think the judge is going to probably lean towards the lesser of the two time periods, because it seemed during the trial that he was somewhat sympathetic to the defendant. I mean, she was very emotional. She was very sad. Her affect was excellent, actually, throughout the trial. She seemed remorseful, and I think he is going to be somewhat lenient and go towards the 6 months rather than the 12 months. But we'll see what happens.
I mean, here's the thing. You're talking about abuse of a corpse. You're talking about abuse of a newborn. That's a pretty serious offense here. Now, she wasn't found guilty of murder or manslaughter or child endangerment. But Byron, can you see the other side where the judge says, you know, maybe the judge felt in his heart that this was going to be a guilty verdict and perhaps the 12-month sentence will be appropriate to try to appease both sides?
Yeah, I could see the judge for sure going on the longer end of that stint towards the 12 months. I mean, she didn't call 911. She didn't do anything. The evidence came in that possibly she lit the corpse on fire. I think all those aggravating circumstances could lead the judge to sentence her to the longer end of that stick, meaning 12 months in prison.
Yeah, and like, just to get an idea here, Terri, you know, she was not in prison. She was out. She was on home confinement. So now a 20-year-old girl in prison for this charge, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult for her to be in prison. You know, her entire life, she seems somewhat sheltered. And I do believe the longer term is going to be difficult for her. She already has these personality disorders. She has eating disorders. Not to say that the state of the defendant should determine the length of the sentence, but I do think it's going to be very difficult for her to be away from home, away from her parents, and in an environment that she obviously has never dealt with before.
Byron, let me ask you, is this more of a case where the jury, you know, didn't think that she killed her, killed Annabelle, or that the prosecution just didn't meet their burden? Because we were left with so many questions. We didn't even have a precise cause of death. We didn't even have definitive evidence about the burning. So do you think in their heart they said, you know, she could have very well have killed this baby, but I got to tell you, the evidence presented by the state just wasn't enough. And if that's the case, do you think the state knows that looking back?
I think the state does know that they didn't meet their burden. I think, just like you just said, Jesse, very well put, there's just too many questions. You know, I always say in trials is it's not a matter of just one thing, it's a bundle of things. And there was just a bundle of things in this case that went unanswered. The prosecution didn't have answers to them. Whether the answers were there or the prosecution just didn't do a job and find the answers, maybe we'll never know. But for sure, there was just too many unknown answers, and I think that's what resulted in the not guilty plea on the bigger charges.
And Terri, look, you know, how much did sympathy play in this? Because let me ask you. At one hand, she was portrayed by the prosecution as a monster. Here's somebody who they said killed her baby, then took these gym selfies, sent text messages saying she's so happy, never prepared to have her baby, didn't care about her baby, and then made up this and never told, you know, anybody what really went down. And they also said that she lied in the police interrogation tape. At the other hand, you had an 18-year-old girl who was cornered by the police. They see her day in and day out. The judge told the jury not to consider sympathy, not to have that go into their evaluation, but the jury's made up of human beings. How much do you think the sympathy vote played into the actual vote?
Well, that's exactly right, Jesse. The jury is made up of human beings. And even if the judge gives the instruction not to let sympathy play a factor in your final decision, it does play a factor. I think the defendant's, her entire demeanor throughout the trial was very sympathetic. The character witnesses who came in, who testified that she's very friendly, she's very kind, she sat at the table with people who normally don't have friends sitting with them. She's just a very kind, giving, loving person, and I think the jury believed that she could not have possibly killed her own baby. And, you know, you're absolutely right, and Byron is right. There was no evidence showing that murder occurred, and the defense did a great job in showing that there were way too many holes and that the burden of proof just was not met by the prosecution. We
might have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about what the defense did in their closing, but we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll play you the prosecution's rebuttal closing, which was so strong, and we'll break it all down. So stay tuned here on Law and Crime. A lot happening today. We'll be right back.